Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here. Time to talk about my deck of the month, which is the Raven's Wand Oracle. So this is a beautiful deck. Let me just get some, I thought I just took a drink. Yep, it's like I went from bronchitis to allergies, all of which is affecting my sinus area and throat and the whole 9 yards. But yeah, the Raven's Wand Oracle has such great artwork, such great fantasy style artwork. And I was a big fan of fantasy up through my 30s, I think. And even beyond that, but it seems like past that point I didn't have so much time kind of for more pleasure-oriented reading. But as I dove into this deck, in terms of reading the guidebook, so it's kind of been on hold for me in terms of a reading deck because I needed to read the guidebook in order to kind of get where some of the cards were coming from. Some of them have quite direct keywords like farewell or family matters, and others have ones that I'm not sure what to make of them, like Night Watch or Black Wand's Redemption. Other keywords like Strength Renewed have a meaning to me that don't really jibe with the card image. So I needed to take a look at the guidebook. And that actually gave me some doubts. So I kind of did what I did with the other decks, with the decks last month, my Alana Fairchild decks, which is that I went through each card in the guidebook, and I kind of gleaned my own meaning from them. Now, this guidebook is not super long, so it's not like it didn't present the same problems that the Alana Fairchild decks do, where there's just a super abundance of text that you have to figure out, well, what does it really mean? There's so much being said here, and some of it is sort of vague. So what does it mean? So in this case, I almost had to extract what is part of the charm of the deck, in that I think each card is like a separate person, has a separate person featured on it. And it gives a little bit of their story, but that isn't always relevant. And I ended up feeling like there was kind of a moralistic, like there's always a moral to the story, there's always a lesson. Whereas, say, if you have a tarot card like the Seven of Wands, you can attach positive or negative meanings to it. It can be, and it depends on what position you're at in the card. Are you, the people down at the bottom who are confronting somebody at the top? Are you the person at the top who's having to put up with people trying to knock you down from the bottom? There was more of a sense of kind of moralistic lessons in this guidebook, which led me to think of it as being aimed sort of more toward preteens. I don't know if it even makes it into teens. Um, but in the end, I don't feel it's an inner child deck either. I definitely do not get that vibe from it. In fact, probably one of the things I'll try with it is a dark deck interview. So, not that it's dark either. I wouldn't call it particularly dark. Now, the cards that you've been seeing on the screen, well, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this as I upload it, but the cards that came up for me today, which I'll talk about in a minute, um, are on the darker side, but a lot of the deck isn't. So maybe what I'll do is I did all that chatting previous to this moment in the video. Maybe I'll show you just, general images of the cards and then show you the cards I got for today. So, but with that moralistic aspect to the deck, I kind of wonder what kind of answers I would get in a dark deck interview, which is about seeing aspects of the self that you haven't been owning up to or facing or have been turning a blind eye or just haven't even been conscious of. Yeah, so I'm just not, I love the artwork. And like I said, there's the whole fantasy thing is just so nostalgic, and the nature and the dragons, and the whole thing is just, it's like my inner teenager. It's like it appeals to my inner early teens or even maybe into early 20s. It just does, and love of animals and forests and but I'm not sure how it's going to end up functioning as an oracle deck for me. When I first got it, I was kind of excited that maybe it could work like for general readings and for like multi-card, like doing a 9-card spread or something like that. I think it might do well with not like a 9-card spread that's to be read largely intuitively, doesn't have specific positions. But I think for tarot spreads that have specific positions, like, X card is, X position is what so-and-so thinks of you, or X position is your advice for this project, or something like that. I think it could work for that. So, let's take a look at my cards for today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you my, how would you even say it? It's not intuitive, so it's not my interpretation. It's going from my revised guide sheets. We won't call them a guidebook because they're not a guidebook, but my summaries, my summaries from the guidebook. So I'll read those and I'll let you know if I see how that could relate to my day. Even though I just pulled these cards and my day hasn't completed yet, so it's not completely fair to judge their accuracy until the end of the day. So what I usually do is I pull the cards at the beginning of the day, or roughly. Here it's now the middle of the day, probably about 2 o'clock. And then I will jot them down or just leave them at the top of the deck. And then I go back in the evening and I reread again from my guide notes, my guide summaries, to see the extent to which I can relate to the cards. And one thing I'm going to be watching for over the course of this month is whether my familiarity with the cards increases. In other words, the extent to which I can leave my guide summaries behind. So I feel like, this deck is at risk. This is an at-risk deck in terms of it staying in my collection. And so we'll have to see. All right, so my first card for today is Night Watch, which I think is appropriate because, it's kind of about not taking rash actions. But let me look. Night Watch, a tense situation that requires restraint and judgment before acting. Be sure you have all the facts before being defensive. So, unless I encounter some tense situation today, and I'm hoping not, I feel like this is about my judgment of this deck. It's saying, don't judge me too harshly yet. Give me a chance. The next card is Strength Renewed. And that I've had earlier this week, so I did already have an association with it. And partly, but not with the image. To me, Strength Renewed, while I'm going through this, the health issues, is that. It's about my health. When I look at her holding the sword, it could be about mental clarity. Again, you've heard me kind of coughing and huffing here. And it could be about, continuing to guard my health a little bit so that it will renew. But it can also be, I've started doing more written types of readings. That is an old strength of writing, is an old strength of mine. So it says, from my notes here, seek out what will give you a renewed sense of purpose, a ritual object as a reminder of one's unique path. Now that would be, today my drum arrived. My hand drum arrived, which I intend to use for like calling in, or, calling in the 4 directions and that kind of thing. So that definitely classifies as a ritual object. So that's probably the meaning of that card for me today. But it's not going to be, it would probably be a long, long, long time before that particular meaning of this card would be true for me again, because I'm not somebody who collects or thinks very often in terms of ritual objects. All right, so the last card is Black Wands Redemption. And here I have, among my notes, admitting errors and making amends. Actually, which, as with a lot of tarot also and other oracle decks, there tends to be like inflated drama. Admitting errors and making amends, for me, that can be quite literally going over and editing some stuff that I have in Google Docs, right? So not very intense at all, but it is facing the errors and correcting them. Feeling guilty, not feeling too guilty right now. There is a task that I was thinking I really needed to get to. So it could mean that. I don't know that there's too much guilt around it, except maybe guilt toward myself. It's something that I intended to do and I haven't gotten to. A couple of them, actually. And then accepting trials necessary for advancement. That could apply to familiarity, getting more familiar with some technical things that I will be needing to do if I want to kind of embrace creating an online tarot business. I wasn't thinking of tackling any of that today. And I don't think it needs to refer to that. It could easily, as I mentioned, refer to those other two things, a task or two that I need to take care of that have been pending for a while, and then editing a Google document. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to read. I'll go ahead, and this one's fairly clear. Or maybe I'll just read Black Wan's Redemption since we're there. So I was thinking I would just read from about the first card, which is the Night Watch. But that one is, I think, maybe too easy. But we'll see. I'm going to read, again, well, first I'll read from the book. And these are not long, so it's not going to take a long time. I'll read from the book, and then I'll read what I took from the book, so that you can see the extent of the difference between those two things. And really, if I were to keep this deck, I would probably put the book away somewhere and keep my notes in the box. I'm not going to be using the book. But let's look at Black Wan's Redemption, because this was one that I remember it was kind of hard for me to extract a meaning. Sunday Flowers reveled in her powers to seduce and manipulate, but her misguided attempt to serve witchcraft led to her making a terrible mistake. So that's like backstory. And that's what I had to think is, okay, don't include the backstory. It's not about that first paragraph. And I think that that's a little disorienting, because normally what we get, right, with a guidebook is up front some kind of nugget of the meaning or keywords or something. But here it's like you have to get used to discarding some of the backstory. So in her unending quest to atone, and since this is called Black Wan's Redemption, to me this is about that atonement, she abandoned her past and became Black Wand and faced many terrifying challenges. Black Wand reminds us that no matter what we've done wrong, we can try to make amends. It might be frightening to confront those we have wronged, but genuine liberation is worth the risk. Maybe you believe your transgressions are so grave they can never be washed away, or that those you appeal to might not forgive you. This might be true, but to flinch from the call to atone is an even greater error. So I could even add like apologies or something like that here, but it felt more active, like there's some all right, what's the story of Cupid and Psyche? When Psyche sees Cupid, she can't just apologize. She has to go through trials before she can atone. So there's a reversed meaning here. Forgiveness works both ways. Black Wand eventually learned to forgive herself because she knew her actions were sincere, not merely to soothe her guilt. Saying I'm sorry carries an obligation not to repeat the same behavior, otherwise people lose faith in us totally, and the chance of redemption slips yet further away. And my meaning that I got out of that, again, admitting errors and making amends, feeling guilty, accepting trials necessary for advancement. So there we have it. I just wanted to read kind of what the guidebook sounds like. as opposed to what I derived from it. Let me take a look at Night Watch again too, because I think that was another one. It's like, it's kind of where the story was kind of getting in the way. It's like, what am I supposed to make of this? You know, I don't think anybody, I wouldn't, the card, it, you know, it looks, he's supposed to be looking at something that could be dangerous, you know, as he guards these children. And there just aren't too many opportunities for me to do that sort of thing. Even when I'm up really late at night, not much is happening. But let me read what it says for Night Watch. Tor's duty is to guide two young witches to Hope Coven, but while sitting night watch, he spies a light deep in the woods. Instantly he reaches for his sword, but refrains from drawing it just yet. His first reaction is to fight, but is the light a threat, an ally, or an opportunity? He is caught between firelight and moonlight, just as he's torn between action and patience. Silently he watches the light draw closer, and even though his protective instincts are very strong, he must act only when absolutely certain. So, to me, I gained the majority of the meaning from that very last part. And in, you know, kind of in general. You know, if I were a mother, I might read this in a different way and be hyper alert in regards to my children that day. For me, the opportunities for me to encounter a situation similar to the story being told here would be when I'm out on a walk with my dogs and another dog approaches. But for more general purposes, I needed kind of a more general meaning for the card. So, my meaning for the card is a tense situation that requires restraint and judgment before acting. Be sure you have all the facts before being defensive. So there it is. And I won't do it anymore in terms of that. One of the things that, because there are lots of children in this deck, which I think is good. I think that's a good thing. I think we have maybe too few children in decks. We also have too few mothers. We have pregnant women, but we don't often see women in a mothering role. And one of the things that, as I was going through this deck, that struck me is that you have girls, you have, I don't know if you have like middle teenage years in here, like 15, 16, 17. I guess maybe you do have some as I go through here. And you have women in their 20s, but you don't have much in the way of women in their childbearing years. You do have some that look like they might be 30s or 40s. And you have at least one that I can think of who's considerably older, you know, probably in her 60s. I'm looking at one here that might be in her 50s. But you don't have any women in a mother role. So how they're reproducing to end up with girls, I don't know. But so we have like a griffin creature who's a mother and has babies right with it. But you don't have anybody actually in that mother role, despite having, one of the nice things about this is the range of ages. But it does lean toward youth. But at least it does have some older women. So that's a lovely aspect to it. I'm sorry, you can probably hear me, you know, going through the deck here as I'm looking and assessing. Yeah, so I don't feel particularly critical about that, but I feel like it was an opportunity lost. Um, that that is something that I think could have been added to this with a couple of cards depicting motherhood. It seems to me would have been quite natural for this deck. So, what I think I'm going to try the dark deck interview with this deck, and I'm going to try maybe my Chinese system of elements with this card, because it gives like what's rising, what's growing, what's consolidated. I think that might work with this deck, so I might try a couple of spreads with this deck. Otherwise, I'm primarily going to be doing my daily draws and just seeing how I get along with it, and making my decision probably mainly based on that, in terms of whether to keep it or whether to let it go. All right, everybody, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.